Dark Souls 2 was a game I was definitely looking forward to, having played the original through several times and enjoyed my time with it quite a bit, even with the issues it had on PC. So now, having completed Dark Souls 2, what do I think of it, and has it improved on the original? Well, sadly, to be quite frank, Dark Souls 2 is a bit of a mixed bag for me, and we'll get into why in a minute, but firstly, let's cover the PC port, which I'm sure is a source of worry for quite a few, with the terrible port the original game had. Well, I'm glad to be able to say that the Dark Souls 2 port works just fine. Graphic settings are fully customizable with all the options you would expect, including things such as texture quality, anti-aliasing, depth of field, and more. But the two most important improvements over the original, in my personal opinion, are a full variety of working resolutions for whatever you wish to use, unlike the previous game which was locked at 720p, and the game can run to a full 60 FPS, unlike the original which was locked at 30. However, I must add that while these improvements are definitely very good, when it comes down to the game itself, Dark Souls 2 doesn't look all that good. It looks dated in quite a few areas and downright ugly in others, with some of the texture quality being quite laughable, like what is being displayed on screen right now, in which you can visibly see the section of textures that has been copied and pasted over and over to cover the ground, and the game is littered with things like this. If you stop and look at most of the ground or buildings in the game for more than a few seconds, you'll be able to spot the textures overlapping with each other, and this can be quite distracting as it's very easy to notice even with the naked eye, which is disappointing as once I did notice this, I kept seeing it all through my time with the game. So as I'm sure many of you are now aware, Dark Souls 2 does not appear as it did in the pre-launch footage, with the graphics and lighting engines getting large downgrades to help the game's performance. However, there is good news to those running the PC version, as there are already solutions that you can implement to improve your experience. Durante, the creator of the DS Fix mod for the original Dark Souls, which went a long way to fixing the game's locked resolution FPS problems, along with many other minor problems, has created a mod for Dark Souls 2 which works in a similar fashion and can be used to fix some of Dark Souls 2's remaining problems. With the ability to use texture replacements and downsampling, you are able to improve the visual quality of your game. So I would recommend looking into that if you find the game's visuals are not up to the standards you would like. So, with all that out of the way, let's move on to the game's combat mechanics. Anyone who has played the original Dark Souls will know the core of its combat is all about positioning and timing. Even a slight mistake with either of these can have a run-of-the-mill enemy completely destroy you, with your skill and decision making being the main factors in the results of each battle. And for those worried about this changing here, you needn't be. The combat feels and plays out just as it did in the past games. But unfortunately, it is in the combat where we run into our first big problem. Even though the combat does feel better now that the game is capable of running over 30 FPS naturally, unlike the original Dark Souls, it seems to suffer from some questionable hitbox detection, meaning attacks hit when they should miss, and vice versa. At first, I thought it might just be me, but after reading around, this is a clear issue that has plagued quite a few, and with the combat being really the main focus of the game, and it being as difficult as it is, this is a real problem. It seemed to me to be most prevalent in the boss fights, which was highly frustrating as it caused my death multiple times. Really, this is something that should not be in any game, but with this game already being highly difficult, things like hit detection should have been completely polished and working as near as perfection as possible. And sadly, that is not the case here, and it does make some of the deaths feel cheap. Moving on to the world of Dark Souls 2. Compared to the first Dark Souls, the world feels far more expansive and has many more locations to visit. Sadly, however, the locations are less interesting and less memorable than those in the original game. Compared to past locations like Sen's Fortress, Anor Londo, and the Painted World to just name a few, Dark Souls 2 only really had two locations that stood out to me, those being Drung Lake Castle and Dragon Ares, which are both located right at the end of the game. But I suppose really that comes down to personal taste more than anything else. But I felt it all simply wasn't as inspired as the first game, with a lot of the locations seeming rehashed and not connecting with each other logically, which is something the first game did very well. But one big improvement for me at least was the inclusion of a significant amount more bosses than the previous game, which is something I was very happy about, as I love the majority of Dark Souls' boss fights. So this to me is great. But even though there are more bosses, they aren't as much an improvement as I was hoping for, as most of the bosses didn't have much interesting or unique about them. Some seemed very similar to each other, and while the first game also suffered from this a little bit, I had hoped for more an improvement here. But there are definitely a few standout bosses that are littered throughout your journey. I just wish they had all been memorable and unique, not just some. Also something to note is that Dark Souls 2 is also shorter than the original. Finishing the original game on my first playthrough took me about 90 hours, and I was doing almost everything I could to completion. Dark Souls 2 to the same effect was about 70 hours. And while the original game's time was most likely extended a bit because of the learning curve, there is still quite a bit of difference there. But really, the thing I find most disappointing about Dark Souls 2 has got to be the story and atmosphere of the game. The storyline may seem very familiar, and there's a reason for that, as it follows almost the exact same path of the last game. You go fight 4 particular bosses to collect their souls, then go fight the king to rejoin the fires to keep the world alive. The problem comes not that they went for a similar storyline as the last game, but that this time around it's a much weaker version. In the first game, you were introduced to all the important people right at the start, along with the world's backstory, and you kept hearing about them all through your time with the game, building the suspense for them. In this game, there is nothing like that. You will have little to no information about them until you meet or fight them, and they themselves are far less important to the world, therefore making them far less interesting in comparison. In combination with this, the world itself feels less ominous, with a more everything is already dead, not dying feel, so you in turn feel like time is less important. You feel less rushed, and you care about everything less than you did in the first game. So that's about all the important things I wish to touch on. So let's get to the conclusion. In the end, besides all the faults I have to say about Dark Souls 2, it is a very good game on its own merits, with most of my problems being the shortfalls in comparison to the original. As I said at the beginning, it is a mixed bag. There are several steps forward for Dark Souls 2, but also several steps back. So let's talk about them. Firstly, the good. The port is much improved over the original, and while definitely not perfect, is a vast improvement to be sure. The world of the game is larger and more expansive, with ample places to explore and much to be discovered. And the increased number of boss battles mean there are many challenges to those who wish to seek them out. And the bad. The game's graphics look like they were from a few years ago and not a modern title. The world, though larger, is filled with less memorable locations, with it being more quantity than quality, and the hitbox detection is a big disappointment because of how it adversely affects combat, and I hope this is something that can be patched. And finally, the reused story and weaker atmosphere, which I hope is something they can address with a new story direction in the next game. Overall, though it may sound like a lot of complaining from me, on its own merits, Dark Souls 2 is still a very good game, just not the amazing game the original Dark Souls was, but definitely not bad by any extent, and that is why my final score for Dark Souls 2 is an 8 out of 10, and you may find that surprisingly high, considering all the bad things I've had to say, but really, in my personal opinion, it's only slightly worse in a few areas than the previous game. It's just unfortunate that those areas are important ones. But really, this comes with a recommended purchase for franchise fans and new players alike. Just keep in mind, if you've played the past games, to curb your expectations a little, and if you're new to Dark Souls and find your time with Dark Souls 2 to your liking, I would recommend you go and try the original, as I don't think you'll be disappointed. Thanks for watching.